Some folks say home is where you hang your hat, but I reckon home is where someone waits for you to come back. Emma Wilkins stood alone at the train station, feeling the weight of the world pressing against her chest. She was a woman who had never truly been seen, abandoned by the life she once knew, her past a patchwork of broken promises and dreams that had never quite come true. But as the train's whistle echoed in the distance, Emma felt something stir inside her, a glimmer of hope, or perhaps it was just desperation. She was here now, in this small western town, waiting for the man who had promised her a new life. But as the minutes passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that no one was coming for her. The crowd around her buzzed with excitement as women were claimed by their new husbands. One by one, they disappeared into the arms of men who had come for them, men who seemed to know exactly what they wanted. And then there was Emma, quiet, forgotten, left behind. She stood there, hoping for a miracle, but fearing she would be left alone once again. As the last of the women were chosen, Emma was the only one left. The harsh whispers of the crowd reached her ears, each word like a dagger to her heart. Not good enough, they said. Too old. Too plain. The sting of rejection was nothing new, but it still hurt just as much. Her heart ached with the familiar feeling of being unwanted, a feeling that had followed her entire life. But then, through the murmurs of the crowd, she heard a sound. Boots on wood. Slow, deliberate. A man walked toward her, his steps heavy with purpose. His eyes met hers, and for the first time that day, someone truly saw her. His name was Jack Rivers. He was a cowboy, tall and rugged, his face weathered by the harsh winds of the West. He didn't look at her like the others had, with pity or disdain. No, he looked at her like he was seeing something no one else could. "I'll take her," Jack said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the murmurs of disbelief. And just like that, the world seemed to stop. The crowd fell silent, the weight of their judgment heavy in the air. But Jack didn't care. He didn't care about the whispers or the stares. He simply stepped forward, extending his hand to Emma. It wasn't the grand gesture she had dreamed of. It wasn't a knight in shining armor. It was just a man offering her a chance to be seen, to be chosen, to be loved. And for the first time in her life, Emma felt the warmth of hope fill her heart. Jack had chosen her, not because she was the prettiest, or the youngest, or the most perfect. He had chosen her because, in that moment, he saw her for who she truly was. A woman who had been broken, but who still had the strength to stand tall. A woman who had been lost, but who had finally found someone who cared enough to find her. As she took his hand, Emma knew that her life was about to change. But what she didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a love story that would heal them both, in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. The wind howled through the empty streets of the town, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust. Emma stood beside Jack's horse, the weight of his hand still lingering in hers. The quiet between them felt almost unnatural, but Emma didn't mind. It was a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, more like the calm after a storm. The train had left, the crowd had dispersed, and now there was nothing left but the two of them, standing at the beginning of something neither of them could predict. Jack gave her a long look before turning toward the horse. "You ready to go?" he asked, his voice rough, but not unkind. Emma nodded, though her heart raced in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this life, but she had no choice now. She had nowhere else to go. As they rode out of town, Emma could feel the stares of the townspeople burning into her back, but Jack didn't seem to notice. He rode ahead, his posture confident, his eyes scanning the horizon. Emma tried to keep up, but the saddle felt foreign beneath her, and the horse's steady gait only served to remind her how far she was from everything she knew. The landscape around them was vast and barren, with hills rolling gently into the distance. It was a land that seemed to stretch on forever, a land that, despite its beauty, felt empty to Emma. She had never been this far from home. She hadn't thought much about what would happen once she got to Jack's place, but now that the reality of it was settling in, she found herself unsure. Was she going to be expected to work the land? To help with the cattle? She had never done anything like that before. Jack, as if sensing her hesitation, glanced back over his shoulder. "Don't worry. You'll get used to it. It ain't much, but it's home." His words were meant to reassure her, but they only added to her uncertainty. They rode in silence for a while longer, the sun beginning its slow descent behind the hills. As the evening light turned golden, they reached the edge of Jack's property. The ranch was modest, a few buildings scattered around a large plot of land. A small cabin, a barn, and a few other outbuildings stood in various stages of repair. It wasn't much, but it was clear that Jack had put a lot of work into it. "This is it," Jack said as they dismounted. He looked at her with a serious expression. "You sure you're all right with this?" Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath and surveyed the land around her. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just a passenger in her own life. This was her choice now. She was here, and for better or for worse, she was going to make the best of it. "I'm all right," she said finally, her voice steady. Jack gave her a nod and turned toward the cabin. "All right then, let's get you settled in." As they walked toward the cabin, Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope inside her. This wasn't what she had expected, but maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of something new. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The cabin was simple, but there was something comforting about it. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room. Jack took off his hat and hung it by the door before turning to her. "You hungry?" he asked. Emma nodded, though she hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell of food reached her nose. Jack moved around the small kitchen with ease, pulling out a pot from the stove. "I wasn't expecting company," he said with a half-smile, "but I can throw something together." Emma watched him, her eyes following his every move. There was something about him, something steady and dependable. It was a quality she hadn't expected to find in a man like him. She had thought he would be rough around the edges, perhaps even cold, but now that she was here, she saw a different side of him. Jack wasn't perfect, but he was real, and in a world that had shown her little kindness, that was more than she could have hoped for. As Jack served the food, Emma sat at the small table, the weight of the day finally beginning to settle on her shoulders. It had been a long journey, both physically and emotionally, but she was here now, and that was enough for tonight. The next few days passed in a quiet, steady rhythm. Emma woke early, just as the first light of dawn crept over the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Jack had already been up for hours, tending to the horses and checking on the cattle. The ranch was small, but it kept him busy. Emma wasn't used to such a life, but she found herself falling into the routine with ease. She started by helping Jack with the chores, fetching water from the well, sweeping the cabin, and preparing simple meals. It was hard work, but it felt good to do something with her hands, to feel the weight of the day on her shoulders. Jack didn't ask for much, but there was a quiet appreciation in his eyes whenever she handed him a cup of coffee or set the table for dinner. She didn't realize how much she had missed the feeling of being useful until now. There was no grand ceremony, no dramatic moments of change. Instead, it was the small things, cooking together, sitting side by side in silence, sharing stories of their pasts, that made Emma feel like she was becoming part of something. It wasn't love yet, not in the way she had always imagined it, but it was something deeper, something real. As the days passed, Emma began to notice the small ways Jack started to soften. He still had the same quiet, stoic demeanor, but there were moments when his guard slipped. The way he would smile at her when she caught him watching her, or the way he would pause in his work to ask if she needed anything. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew cool, they sat together on the porch. Jack leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on his knees. Emma took a deep breath, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "This place," she said softly, "it's peaceful." Jack glanced at her, a flicker of something in his eyes. "It's the land," he said, his voice low. "It has a way of doing that to you. Makes you stop and listen." Emma nodded. She had never been much of a listener before. Her life had always been about moving forward, about surviving. But here, with Jack, she felt like she could finally breathe. The weight of her past, the rejection, the loneliness, all of it seemed to fade with each passing day. Jack looked at her for a moment longer before standing up and stretching his arms. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's another busy day." Emma stood as well, following him into the cabin. As she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come in such a short time. She had started this journey with nothing but hope and fear, and now, she was here, in this small cabin with a man who saw her for who she really was. Not perfect, not special, but someone worth giving a chance. It was a strange kind of comfort. She didn't need grand gestures or promises. She just needed to be here, in this moment, with Jack. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe this was where she was meant to be. Days turned into weeks, and Emma settled into the rhythm of ranch life. There was a comfort in the routine, a quiet sense of purpose that came with the tasks she performed every day. She woke before the sun, made breakfast, and helped Jack with the morning chores. The days were long, filled with the steady pace of feeding the animals, mending fences, and caring for the garden. At first, it had all felt so foreign to her, but now, as the seasons changed and the land began to bloom under her care, Emma felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known was possible. Jack, for his part, seemed content as well. He still kept to himself, working the land with the quiet intensity he had always known. He didn't speak much about his past, but Emma had learned to read the small signs, the slight tension in his shoulders after a long day, the way he stared out at the horizon as if searching for something, the flicker of a memory crossing his eyes when she asked too many questions. They had both been broken in different ways, but together they were learning to heal. One evening, as the stars began to shine above them, Emma sat outside, watching the fireflies dance around the porch. She felt a calm that had taken root deep inside her. It wasn't the kind of peace she had once imagined, with grand gestures or sweeping romances. It was a quiet, steady peace, the kind that comes from working side by side with someone who doesn't expect anything more from you than what you are. Jack came out of the cabin, wiping his hands on a towel. He sat beside her, a comfortable silence settling between them. For the first time, Emma noticed how much he had softened. His rough edges were still there, but there was something more, something tender, something real. "You know," Jack said, his voice low, "I never thought I'd find peace like this. Not after everything that's happened." Emma turned to look at him, her heart heavy with the unspoken words between them. She understood. They had both been searching for something, though neither of them had known exactly what it was. "I never thought I'd find a place where I belonged," Emma replied softly. "But here, I feel like I'm finally home." Jack didn't answer at first. Instead, he looked up at the stars, his face softened by the light of the fire. "It's funny," he said after a long pause. "I never thought I needed anyone. But now, I can't imagine this place without you." Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in something she had never thought possible. She had spent so much of her life wondering if she was worth choosing, if she was enough. But here, with Jack, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of being seen. And that, more than anything, was worth everything. As the fire crackled softly between them, Emma leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. It was a simple moment, but it was one that spoke volumes. She was no longer the woman who had been abandoned, no longer the one left behind. She was here, with Jack, and together, they were building something that was more than just survival. It was a life. Their life. The days grew longer as the warm summer sun stretched across the land. Emma had settled into the quiet rhythm of life on the ranch, and she found herself growing more comfortable with each passing day. She had never thought she could feel so at home in a place so far removed from everything she had ever known. But here, with Jack, it felt like the world had finally stopped moving so fast. Jack, too, seemed to find peace in the simplicity of their life. He still worked tirelessly, as he always had, but there was a certain ease to his movements now. He didn't seem as weighed down by the past, though Emma could see the scars it had left behind. They were there in the way he still hesitated to let people too close, in the silence that often hung between them, as if he were waiting for something to change. Emma didn't push him. She had learned early on that Jack wasn't a man who shared easily, but she could see it, the way his shoulders relaxed when he was around her, the way he let his guard down just enough to let her in. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Jack and Emma stood outside the cabin, looking at the land they had come to know so well. The cool evening air was a welcome relief from the heat of the day. Jack was silent for a long time, his hands resting on the fence, his gaze focused on the horizon. "It's strange," he said finally, his voice low. "I never thought I'd be here. Not after everything that happened." Emma didn't respond immediately. She simply stood beside him, her eyes following the path of his gaze. "I used to think I needed to be alone, Jack continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But I don't feel so alone anymore. Emma's heart fluttered at his words. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that, not after all the walls he had built up around himself. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to him. Jack, she said softly, her voice steady. I think we both needed this. We both needed a place to heal, a place to find peace. Jack turned to her, his eyes softening in the dim light. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a small but meaningful gesture. Maybe you're right, he said, his voice still rough but filled with something more now. Maybe we both needed to be found. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with a feeling she had never expected to find in this lonely land. She had come to the West with nothing, with only the hope of finding a new life. But here, with Jack, she had found something far greater, a connection, a sense of belonging, and a love that was slowly growing between them, like the gentle turning of the seasons. The silence between them now felt different, filled with an unspoken understanding, a mutual recognition that they had both been given a second chance. Jack had chosen her, not because she was perfect, but because she was the one who had been there when he needed someone the most. And in return, Emma had chosen him, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had come to realize that home was not just a place, it was a person. As the stars shone brightly above them, Emma leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. It was in this quiet moment that Emma understood the depth of what she had found. It wasn't the kind of love she had dreamed of as a girl, the kind filled with grand gestures and fairy tale endings. It was something simpler, something stronger. It was the kind of love that grew over time, born of shared experiences, quiet moments, and the understanding that, together, they could face whatever came next. The seasons shifted once more, and the warmth of summer faded into the cool embrace of autumn. The land, which had once felt so vast and empty to Emma, now felt like home. She had learned to appreciate the simplicity of life on the ranch, the early mornings, the quiet evenings, and the steady rhythm of work. With each passing day, she found herself becoming more attuned to the land, the animals, and most importantly, to Jack. They had settled into a comfortable routine. Jack still worked tirelessly, as was his way, but Emma could see the changes in him. He was more at ease, more willing to share small moments with her. They spent evenings together on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the stars. It was during one of these quiet nights that Emma noticed the subtle shift in their relationship. She had always felt like an outsider in her own life, always searching for a place to belong. But here, with Jack, she felt as though she was finally seen for who she truly was. You know, Jack said one evening, his voice thoughtful, I used to think that I didn't need anyone. But having you here, it's different. I didn't know what I was missing until I found it. Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with the weight of his words. She had heard him speak about the past, about the pain he had carried with him for so long. But she had never heard him speak like this, with a quiet acceptance, as if he were finally letting go of the walls he had built around himself. I never thought I could feel at home in a place like this, Emma replied softly, her voice steady. But here, with you, I feel like I finally belong. Jack turned to her, his eyes softening in the dim light. I'm glad you're here, he said, his voice low. I don't know what I'd do without you. Emma smiled, the warmth of his words wrapping around her like a blanket. She had never expected to find this kind of peace, this kind of connection, in a place so far from the life she had known. But here, on this quiet ranch, she had found something far more meaningful than she could have imagined. As the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp, Emma found herself looking forward to each new day. The work, though hard, felt purposeful, and the moments she shared with Jack, whether in silence or in conversation, felt like the glue that was slowly binding them together. They weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of their pasts threatened to pull them apart. But those moments were fleeting. In the end, they were learning how to heal, how to move forward together. And for Emma, that was enough. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the barn, Jack looked over at her, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're not so bad at this ranching thing, he teased, his voice warm. Emma laughed, brushing the dirt from her hands. I'm learning, she said, her smile matching his. And besides, I've got a good teacher. Jack's expression softened, and for a brief moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, in this small corner of the world, building something together. It wasn't always easy. There were still challenges ahead, still things they both needed to face. But Emma knew, without a doubt, that this was where she was meant to be, with Jack, on this land. And that, more than anything, was enough to make her believe in the future they were slowly creating. Winter came slowly, painting the land in shades of white and gray. The once vibrant greens of the pasture were now hidden beneath a thick layer of snow. Emma had never seen anything like it. She had heard stories of harsh winters in the West, but nothing could have prepared her for the stillness that surrounded them. The world outside was quiet, save for the crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly, casting a soft glow on the walls. Jack was by the hearth, tending to the flames. Emma watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with affection. There was something so steady about him, something that grounded her in a way she had never known before. She had never imagined a life like this, not in her wildest dreams. They had come so far from the uncertain beginnings of their time together. The ranch had become more than just a place to live. It had become their home, a symbol of everything they had built together. The days were still full of work, feeding the animals, repairing fences, making sure the ranch was ready for the harsher days ahead. But there was something peaceful about it now. They worked together, side by side, no longer strangers, but partners. There were still moments when Emma thought about her past, about the life she had left behind. She missed her family, though the pain of that loss had faded over time. She missed the familiarity of the East, the bustling streets, and the noise of the city. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, she had found something far more valuable: peace. Jack came over to her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You cold?" he asked, his voice low. Emma smiled, shaking her head. "No, I'm fine. Just thinking." Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly curious, but he didn't press her. Instead, he sat down beside her, the warmth of his body a welcome comfort in the chilly room. "About what?" he asked, his voice softening. Emma turned to him, meeting his eyes. There was a depth to them now, a kind of quiet understanding that had grown between them over the months. "About how far we've come," she said softly. "How different everything is now." Jack nodded, his gaze turning toward the fire. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I never thought it would be like this. I thought I was meant to be alone." Emma reached out, placing her hand gently on his. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Jack looked at her then, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he spoke again. "You've given me more than I ever expected," he said quietly. "More than I thought I deserved." Emma squeezed his hand, her heart swelling in her chest. "You deserve it, Jack. You deserve all of it." They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Emma felt a warmth spread through her, not from the fire, but from the man sitting beside her. She had come to love him in a way she had never known was possible. It wasn't the kind of love that was loud or dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and real. It was the kind of love that grew over time, born of shared experiences and mutual respect. Jack's voice broke the silence. "I never thought I'd find a place like this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But with you, I think I've finally found it." Emma smiled, her heart full. "We've both found it, Jack. This is our home. Together." The fire burned low, casting shadows on the walls of their little cabin. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, there was nothing but warmth. For the first time in her life, Emma felt like she had truly found where she belonged. She had come to the West searching for something: freedom, a fresh start, a place to heal. But what she had found was so much more. She had found a life, a love, and a home. And she knew, with all her heart, that this was only the beginning. As the winter deepened, the ranch became a quiet sanctuary, nestled in the rolling hills and surrounded by the stark beauty of the snow-covered land. Emma had long since adjusted to the rhythm of life here, the cold no longer a challenge but a companion, a reminder of the resilience that had taken root in her heart. She and Jack had learned to rely on each other in ways that had once seemed impossible. The mornings were filled with the scent of wood smoke and the sound of hooves crunching on the frozen ground as they tended to the cattle and horses. The evenings, once quiet and solitary, had transformed into shared moments of peace, where the world outside could be forgotten, if only for a while. Jack had stopped looking at the horizon with that same distant, almost haunted expression. He still worked hard, of course, but there was a calmness to him now, something that was new and unfamiliar to Emma. He was no longer the man who had lived in the shadow of his past. He had become the man who was here, in the present, with her. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames casting dancing shadows across the walls, Emma looked over at Jack. He was staring into the fire, a thoughtful expression on his face. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just thinking about how far we've come," he said, his voice low but steady. "I never thought I'd find peace, not like this." Emma's heart swelled at his words. She had never imagined that she would be the one to help Jack find peace, or that she would find it herself. There was still so much about their past that remained unspoken, so much they both carried with them. But they had learned to accept each other's scars, to understand that those were part of what made them whole. "I never thought I'd be here either," Emma said, her voice quieter now. "But somehow this feels right." Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he shifted in his seat, his hand reaching out to hers. He clasped it gently, as if anchoring himself to her. "It feels right to me too," he said, his eyes meeting hers. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, of shared understanding, of a bond that had grown stronger over time. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the warmth of the fire and their shared presence kept the cold at bay. As the days passed, Emma found herself embracing the life they had built. She no longer felt like an outsider, no longer wondered if she truly belonged here. She did. She belonged to this land, to this life, and most importantly, to Jack. The work remained hard, the winters long, but they faced it together, and in that shared effort, Emma found something she had never known before, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and most of all, love. In a place so far removed from the world she once knew, Emma had found everything she had been searching for. She had found a home. She had found Jack. And as the fire burned low that night, she knew that together, they would face whatever the future held, one quiet day at a time. Spring came quietly, creeping over the land in gentle waves. The snow melted slowly, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the air turned crisp, carrying the scent of fresh growth and the promise of renewal. Emma woke early, as she had every day for the past months, the sunlight spilling over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the ranch. The days were growing longer, and the world seemed to come alive again. The work on the ranch had become second nature to her now. She no longer thought of it as a struggle, but as part of the rhythm of life. Jack had always been the one to lead, guiding her with quiet patience, teaching her how to handle the animals, mend the fences, and keep the fires burning. She had learned much from him, not just about ranching but about trust, patience, and the subtle art of letting go. As the land began to warm and the grass started to green, Emma felt a quiet sense of pride. This place, which had once seemed so foreign, now felt like hers. Jack, too, seemed lighter these days. There was a softness to his demeanor, a peace in the way he moved through the world. He still didn't talk much about his past, but there was an understanding between them, a shared silence that spoke louder than words ever could. One morning, as they stood together near the barn, Jack turned to her, his hand resting on the fence. "You've done good here, Emma," he said quietly. "This place, it's ours now." His words sent a warmth through her chest, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of what they had created together. It wasn't just the land or the animals. It was their life, built on quiet moments and shared efforts. Emma smiled, looking up at Jack. "It's ours," she agreed softly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Jack nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at her. There was a brief moment of silence between them, a silence that had grown comfortable over time. Then, as if a weight had lifted, Jack reached out and gently touched her hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words could say. They had both been through so much, but together, they had built something that was stronger than either of them could have imagined. As the spring days stretched on, they worked side by side, planting seeds for the season ahead, mending fences, and preparing for the challenges that lay in the months to come. There were still hard days, days when the work seemed endless and the weight of their pasts threatened to pull them under. But each day, they faced it together. Emma had learned that peace didn't come from avoiding hardship, but from facing it head-on, knowing that there was someone beside you, someone who understood. Jack, too, had learned to let go of the past, to embrace the present and the future that they were building. He had stopped looking back and started looking ahead. Together, they had found something that neither of them had expected. They had found home, and that was enough for both of them. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, the sun dipping low behind the hills, Jack turned to Emma. "You ever think about the future?" he asked, his voice low. Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with the same hope that had taken root in her chest. "Every day," she said softly. "I think about it all the time, and I know that whatever it holds, we'll face it together." Jack smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made Emma's heart flutter. "Yeah," he said, "together." The land around them, vast and open, seemed to stretch on forever. But in that moment, with Jack by her side, Emma knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, Emma felt herself becoming more connected to the land, to Jack, and to the life they had built together. The ranch had become not just a place to live, but a home, her home. It had been a long time since she had felt this sense of belonging, and now, each day, she woke with a sense of purpose. The work was still hard, but it didn't seem as heavy anymore. They had learned to rely on each other, to share in both the burdens and the rewards. Together, they tended to the animals, fixed fences, and prepared for the upcoming seasons. Jack still had his moments of quiet reflection, and Emma knew that there were things in his past that he kept locked away. But she also saw the way he looked at her, the way his hand lingered when they worked side by side, the way he smiled when she caught his eye across the room. Those small gestures spoke louder than any words ever could. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was still and cool, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the trees. Jack leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Emma sat beside him, her legs stretched out in front of her, her hands resting on her knees. "You ever miss it?" Jack asked, his voice soft, as if testing the air. Emma looked at him, not quite sure what he meant. "Miss what?" she asked. Jack turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "The life you left behind. Your family. The city." Emma took a deep breath, considering his words. For a moment, the memories of her past, her family, the noise of the city, the life she had once known, flashed before her eyes. But those memories, though still there, didn't have the same pull they once did. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "but I don't miss it like I thought I would." Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Why's that?" Emma smiled, looking out at the land before them. "Because this," she gestured around them. "This feels right. I found something here. Something I never knew I needed." Jack didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, looking at her, as if searching for something. Finally, he spoke, his voice a little rougher than usual. "I never thought I'd find a place like this. Not after everything I've been through." Emma turned to him, meeting his gaze. "I never thought I'd find it either," she said quietly. "But I did. And I'm here." Jack's gaze softened, and for a moment, they just sat there, side by side, in the quiet of the evening. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic declarations. Just the quiet understanding that they had found something real, something worth holding on to. The wind picked up a little, stirring the leaves around them. Jack shifted in his seat, turning slightly toward Emma. "You know," he said, his voice steady, "I never thought I'd be able to share this life with anyone. But with you it's different." Emma's heart fluttered at his words, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not just for the life they had built, but for the quiet moments like this. Moments when the world felt small and simple, and everything made sense. "I'm glad it's different," she said softly. "I couldn't imagine being anywhere else." They both fell silent then, watching as the sky turned darker, the stars beginning to twinkle above them. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, in this small corner of the world, content in each other's presence. Emma knew that the future was still uncertain, that there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She had found a place where she belonged. And no matter what came next, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. As the days passed, Emma felt a quiet joy settle into her bones, a joy she hadn't realized she had been missing for so long. The ranch had become their sanctuary, a place where the outside world couldn't reach them. They had built something together, something real, something enduring. The sun was shining more often now, as spring fully arrived. The land was waking up, and so were they. Jack's hands had become rougher from the work, but his smile had softened, and his eyes had started to lighten, like the clouds lifting after a long storm. Emma had found her place beside him, not just on the land, but in his life. The bond they had formed over the past year felt like it could never be broken. There were still moments of silence, times when Jack retreated into himself, but they had become less frequent. Emma had learned to give him space, to let him work through whatever thoughts or memories weighed on him. But there were other moments when he turned to her with a quiet tenderness in his gaze, when their shared understanding was all that was needed. One evening, as they worked together in the barn, Emma turned to Jack, brushing the strands of hair from her face, her hands still warm from the work. "Jack," she said, her voice softer than usual, "do you ever think about the future?" Jack paused, his hand stilling for a moment before he turned to look at her. His expression was thoughtful, like he was weighing her question. "I think about it sometimes," he said slowly. "But mostly, I think about what we've got now." Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. "I've never had this before," she said quietly. "Not this kind of life, not this kind of peace." Jack nodded, his lips curling into a rare smile. "Me neither." There was something comforting in the way he spoke, as if they had both found something that was theirs. And theirs alone. The ranch, the life they had built together, it was theirs. And it was more than either of them had expected. As the days stretched into weeks, Emma felt a sense of fulfillment that had long eluded her. She worked hard, but it was a different kind of work now. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about creating, about growing something that mattered. The land had given her a sense of purpose, and Jack had given her something even more precious, a place to call home. The sun was beginning to set one evening, casting a warm orange glow over the ranch as they sat together on the porch. Jack stretched out his legs, his hat tipped back, and Emma leaned back in her chair, enjoying the quiet. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky, one by one, and the cool evening breeze was a welcome relief after a hot day. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to leave all this behind?" Emma asked softly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Jack turned his head to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Leave it behind," he repeated, as if the idea were foreign to him. "I can't imagine doing that." Emma's heart warmed at his words. "I can't imagine it either," she said quietly. "But sometimes, I wonder if we're ready to face what's next." Jack's gaze softened as he studied her. "We're ready," he said simply. "We've been ready for a long time." Emma smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. It wasn't about leaving or facing something new. It was about being here, in this moment, with Jack. It was about the life they had made together, the love that had grown between them, and the peace that had finally settled into their hearts. There would always be challenges ahead, but for the first time in her life, Emma felt ready to face them. Not alone, but with Jack by her side. Together, they could handle anything. And that was all that mattered. The days grew warmer as summer settled into the ranch. The once cold winds of winter had softened, and the land seemed to hum with life. The grass, rich and green from the spring rains, swayed gently in the breeze. The animals were thriving, and the barn was full of activity. Emma had fully embraced her role on the ranch, her hands now accustomed to the hard work, and her heart content in the life she had built with Jack. Together, they worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The sun began to set one evening, casting long shadows over the land. Jack and Emma sat on the porch, watching the sky shift from gold to pink, and then to the deep blue of night. The air was warm, with the faint scent of wildflowers drifting in from the fields. Jack sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, a simple act that had become so familiar to her. They didn't need to speak. The quiet comfort between them had become enough. After a long silence, Jack spoke, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to Emma. "I used to think life would always be about surviving. I never thought it could be this peaceful." Emma turned to him, her heart swelling at the vulnerability in his words. Jack had always been the strong, silent type, never one to show weakness. But here, with her, he was beginning to open up, and it meant more to Emma than she could express. "It's not perfect," she said softly, "but it's ours. And it's real." Jack's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop moving. It was just the two of them, in this small corner of the world, surrounded by the life they had created together. He nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "It is real, and I never want to lose it." Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle deep in her chest. She had never imagined that this life, so different from the one she had once known, would become everything she had ever needed. She had come to the West searching for freedom, for a fresh start, but what she had found was so much more. She had found a place to belong. Jack reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was gentle, but it carried all the weight of the love that had blossomed between them over time. Emma took his hand, her heart beating faster as she held it tightly. In that simple moment, she knew that nothing else mattered. The past, with all its pain and uncertainty, had faded into the background. They had created something new, something worth fighting for. The stars began to twinkle above them, the sky now fully dark. Jack turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the moonlight. "I'm glad you're here, Emma," he said quietly. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands me like you do." Emma's heart fluttered at his words, and she squeezed his hand in return. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I'm glad I found you." They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying the peace of the moment, the comfort of each other's presence. The world outside could wait. In this moment, in this life, they had everything they needed. Together, they had found the peace they had both been searching for, and it was more than either of them had ever imagined. As summer approached its peak, the ranch felt alive with the energy of new beginnings. The fields stretched green and full, the animals were thriving, and Emma and Jack had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together with an ease that had grown over the months, each task shared without a second thought. The bond between them had only deepened, and though words were not always necessary, the way they moved through the world side by side spoke volumes. There was a quiet understanding between them, a knowing that had developed over time. They had both come from different places, different lives, but together, they had created something that neither of them had ever expected. As the days grew longer, Emma found herself more at peace than she had ever been. The early mornings were still filled with work, feeding the horses, checking on the cattle, but the work no longer felt burdensome. It felt fulfilling. The ranch, once a place of uncertainty and struggle, had become her home. Jack had become more than just the man she had shared her life with. He had become her partner in every sense of the word. He had shown her the meaning of quiet strength, of love that was steady and constant, and of a life that, though hard, was worth living. One afternoon, after a long day of working the land, Jack and Emma sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the evening air was warm with the lingering heat of the day. Emma leaned against Jack, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. She didn't have to say anything. The silence between them was comfortable, a reflection of the peace they had found together. "We've built something good here," Jack said quietly, his voice low. "Better than I ever thought we could." Emma smiled, turning her head to look at him. "We've built it together," she said softly. Jack's gaze softened as he looked at her. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her skin for a moment longer than necessary. "I never thought I'd find peace like this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was meant to be alone. But you—" He stopped, his words caught in his throat for a moment, and Emma could see the vulnerability in his eyes. She reached up, cupping his face with her hand, her thumb brushing gently over his cheek. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said softly. "Not ever again." Jack's lips curled into a small smile, his eyes closing for a moment as he leaned into her touch. "I'm glad," he said simply, and Emma could hear the truth in his voice. The weight of his past, the years of loneliness, had lifted in the presence of their shared life. They didn't need grand promises or sweeping gestures. What they had was simple, yet it was more than either of them had ever imagined. As the evenings settled around them, The stars began to twinkle in the sky, and the sounds of the ranch faded into a peaceful silence. Jack wrapped his arm around Emma's shoulders, pulling her closer as they sat in the quiet of the night. The world outside could have continued turning, but for Emma and Jack, this moment, in each other's arms, was enough. Together, they had created a life, one built on love, trust, and the shared understanding that they were no longer alone. And for the first time in her life, Emma knew that the future, no matter what it held, would be full of the promise of what they had built together.